So Theodore, what's the one thing you'd like people to know about social care?
It's a really sort of profound question that I've been thinking about a lot since you sort of first asked me. I think I would like to try and make the case for why being in a care home might be beneficial to staying in your own home. And what we offer as a care business at Springdene, for example, one of many care providers. What do we do that might you know bring improvement to people's lives?
So what is the case for a care home? And you and I both have vested interest in this answer, but a lot of local authorities are going down uh, a care at home or care at home first model. We have a number of different institutions and companies now offering supported living or a way of combining care in your own home. What's the benefits of a care home, do you think?
So I think firstly I would say there is a space for all those different types of care, and more importantly we need it with our aging population. All those different, the being at home and having some care at home, being in the more complex and in sort of residential care and nursing care, those are all important. I think the main issue today is we don't have a joined up system to make those operate. But in terms of what we operate, residential care homes, I think there's a sort of massive benefit, and it's mainly to make people feel like their lives are worth living again. It's being with others with similar interests. It's the socialization and the interaction, and also a bit of at that time in your life, people doing some stuff for you. I think that feels good. I've had those conversations with residents. Your laundry's done for you, your meals are cooked for you. You can sort of relax, and you have the attention and care, and your needs are being satisfied.
Is that a challenging conversation for some to be able to be a bother, to be a pain, or to impose this work upon something else, something that, uh, in my experience, there are some people of a certain this older generation who don't want to be a bother. They don't want to cause that issue.
Yeah, I think for us, we are sort of like providing these services, and that feels normal. And sometimes, again, I've spoken to residents, and can we trouble you to have our laundry done and care us to see us so often and 3 meals a day, and that's really amazing. Um, Yeah, so I think there definitely is an aspect of that, and I totally understand the other side, which is it's our home. We have all our belongings and our things, and we have a lifetime spent in our home. So I totally appreciate people want to stay there as long as possible. I think what we try and do, and many others in care, is try and make the care home feel like a part of your home, an extension of that. Everyone in the lounge in the care home has their chair. It occasionally breaks out into a round of sort of fisticuffs, but that's part of the sort of feeling that that's a piece of their own home. They can come into the lounge and have their chair, but they're with a load of other people of their similar age and their similar interests and ideas, and suddenly there's sort of more things to do, and people to talk to, a more fulfilling life.
One thing I really wanted to discuss with you is how, despite the fact that we both run residential care homes, I think the geographical difference between us is fascinating. We're very much a rural sec rural provider. Um, we've got one that could be considered to be within an urban environment. Your care homes are based in London, and I think being in within the M25, I think that comes with different complications that certainly that I experience. What's London like for care at the moment?
So yeah, it was interesting. So yesterday we were both at the launch of the Care England report, and we could do a bit of networking with others in the sector, and that was possibly the most interesting set of conversations. Was around what's it like where you are, what's it like where your provision is, and London is tough. Sounds like other places are too, but I think the main things are, number one is getting staffing. Our carers, how can they afford to live in London? and would they want to commute 1 or 2 hours? So finding those caring, loving staff to bring into the homes is really tough. The local authorities are extra strapped for cash, and as I sort of written when I was interviewed by the Sunday Times a few weeks back, is that we haven't seen rate rises from our local authorities for at least a decade, and so the rates they're offering are massively sort of disparate to the rates that we need to charge for our care to be sustainable. So I think those are two major factors. I think on the other side, you could say people have more housing and that is more valuable. So again, without a proper model of how people pay for their care, that may help. But every day we have discussions about people who don't know that, and actually this is why I thought it was important to come on this podcast, because just today we had an occupancy meeting conversation this morning where this person's mother was in our home, because we've been around for a while, and that's always nice to have relatives say, my mother was there, they want to come in now, but they don't have the funds and it's tied up in a property, and they don't know that they need to go through a property disregard or to try and sell the property, because that's the only way care can be funded. So that means now they probably have to wait a year before they can move in. And do they have that time? And that really points to the whole bigger issue right now in social care, which is moving into a care home is such a big decision. It's a massive life change involving a load of different stakeholders. And more people have less and less time to make that decision. It's become a sort of urgent crisis decision, and it should have a lot of longer time to consider. We see that sort of, I'm sure you see it too, but this sort of like standard progression where people are wanting to stay at home, so they become frail and they need a carer, which is perfectly reasonable. But as things progress, the carer needs to take a holiday, or people maybe have a risk of falls, so you need a carer at night, and so they end up having 2, 3, 4 carers. And then suddenly they realise, we can't afford this anymore. Or, their mother or father has a fall or a sort of urgent incident, and they don't have the people around them to properly look after them. So they're having to make this sort of crisis decision now to suddenly move into a care home. And during that period they've been having that care at home, they've also used up a lot of the funding. So for those potential residents, they're left in a situation where they've got to make this really quick decision. They have a lack of funds. We really have no sort of overarching solution in the sector of how to sort of manage that. And so compressing all that down and trying to support them and give them that help and advising them what to do in such a short space of time is really one of the biggest challenges we have.
That's not a story that is unique to London. You talk to any provider, you're going to hear that story. Where I think there is a uniqueness about the London market is you mentioned the wages and the cost of living in London, and that imbalance is always going to be there. But I think you've also got, from me living outside the M25 and sort of looking in, this perception of London as a much more dense place, much more crowded, with frankly more people around you and actually better transport links. So I'm just wondering about the journey that people take within care, in that if you're talking about one of our more rural environments, actually loneliness and the social isolation is probably one of the more startling parts about how we see care in our environment. People tend to be slightly more rural, living in smaller villages, or the towns aren't that well connected. Whereas in London, perhaps it's easier to get around. Is that a vision of London that resonates with you, or is that me just going, or is that some sort of halcyon view of
I think that might be a vision that people outside London see of London. I don't want to necessarily pit this London versus outside London. Our business happened to be sort of organically grown around where my grandparents, the founders of the business, lived. But I would say the opposite of that is that people perceive there to be more connection, but actually people can be much more lonely in a big city. with all these connections around you, but you don't have access to them. You feel like you're in a busy space, there's a lot going on, but you're isolated in your own home. And potentially it's actually more lonely in that sort of environment. Um, yes, potentially there's more access for people to come see you, but can you go out and do things? Do you have the sort of independence to do that? Not necessarily. And again, that's the answer. Being cared for in your own home is wonderful in the sense you can stay in your safe environment, but being in the care home means you have access to now a whole new range of resources. Your GP coming in every week, the specialist nursing teams coming in and assessing your needs, carers there around the clock looking after you. And that is a sort of more a place where you can be more social and more healthy overall.
Mm. You spoke earlier about and we'll definitely come on to this, the nature of the local authorities within London. No local authority has many budgets, but the first thing that gets cut is the third spaces that are often funded by local authorities, libraries being a good example. I think so. Are we then saying that within London, because of perhaps higher budgetary pressures that they might be facing, actually you're seeing a collapse of the third spaces and these community hubs that may have arisen previously? They're dropping away. The pubs are closing. The bookies are closing. So where do people go to get their socialization? So they're trapped at home more.
Yeah, I think that definitely is part of it. I also just think if you are getting older, if you are getting sicker, and you can't get out of your house, physically you can't get out of your house, then you don't have access to those things. But yes, a lot of our amenities are going. We're prioritizing house building. You're losing your supermarkets where you might go for 2 or 3 times a week. You're losing whether it's your DIY shops or, as you say, gambling or whatever it is. It's those extra amenities which no longer have value because it's so urgent to build houses that is all going. And it's clear the local authorities are under massive pressure because they've also had very little funding increases over the years. But the thing that always shocks me is that there is no specific funding for social care still in this country. That has not been agreed. There are areas of specific funding for specific needs the government's provided, but generally the local authority is having to balance up where they put that big pot of money. Do they look after someone's mother in social care and pay for the place, or are they going to fix their potholes in the road? And they've got a load of important areas they need to cover and support people, and we just do not have that funding that's just for social care, which is such an important part of people's lives, which feels like it gets sort of forgotten about a lot, that it's not, people aren't important anymore when they get older and need support, and it's not really focused on.
We mentioned house prices. I'm just going to stick with the generalizations about London here. Everyone clearly has £1 million house if you live in London. Everyone therefore can afford to pay for their own care. Out where we are in the sticks, I think our business is roughly 50-50 funded local authority versus private. What's your funding mix like? You mentioned obviously you had that individual who was going to have to sell their house before they can move into your care home. Are most people in that, when they're coming to you, are they in that place of I have a property but I need to sell it, or are they more cash rich, or what's your funding mix look like?
So going back about 10 years, I would say probably 40% of our residents are funded by local authority. And we were managing in that model of having a quite even split of private and local authority. And at that point, the disparity between what local authorities were offering to pay and what we were sort of charging for care was quite small. And so that worked. Fast forward to now, that disparity is, local authorities are offering half of what we're charging because there have been no increases, and we just cannot afford to look after people at the high level which we are committed to and aspire to if they're only paying that very low rate. So a few years ago now already, we stopped taking local authority residents in because we just can't afford to. But more and more, there's a lot of cases of people who have come into our home who are private payers and then are running out of money. And again, we then are doing everything we can to support them to keep them in the home. But that means the local authorities have to pay a reasonable rate, and we will always negotiate with them, but it has to be somewhere near a break even or somewhere we can make a small amount of money off those residents to be a sustainable and viable business. So what we're seeing is the numbers of local authority in our homes being quite stable, and mostly those are increasing just on those cases of people who are running out of money. And we stipulate, as I think nearly all care providers do, that you need to have a certain amount of income and you need to commit to paying privately for a certain amount of time. Now, we just had a local authority email us and say that has to be 3 years. You have to tell people it's 3 years. Well, we say 2 because we know most people can't afford much more than 2 years.
Sorry, just the local authority is telling you that you have to tell people to expect to pay for care for 3 years.
Correct. They have sent us what they created is an information sheet for relatives, for people in the community to understand how care works, and they have instructed that they must be able to pay for 3 years, and they've told us to get that information out there, basically. But that doesn't correlate with the reality that we're seeing on the ground looking after people, because people can't afford that. Yes, many people in London, and certainly not all, have money tied up in a property, but with all the hurdles they have to step over, and most people can't understand the property disregards or how it works when you have to get financially assessed for the local authority to start funding your care. And even when you do, the local authority can take 6 months to a year to agree that funding. So it's an area that causes a lot of stress and anxiety for people moving into social care.
Let's pick up that really quick learning point then. For anyone who's listening and is going, property disregard, what the hell is that? Explain. What is a property disregard?
Effectively, you have a property that you own and you want to use the money within that property to fund your care. You can have an agreement with the local authority that effectively you owe them the money in that tied up in that property, and they will pay for your care. Now, that is good in a number of ways. It supports the providers because we can say this is our full rate that can get you the care you need and deserve based on your care need, and the local authority will pay that full rate because they know there's the funding there. Again, it's a sign that if local authorities were properly funded by central government, then the system would work, because suddenly there's money available locked up in their property, and because the local authority know it exists, they're willing to pay the proper rate for these people to be properly looked after.
So and people can access its loan in our particular geographies. They just go to the local authority as part of once they're registered with the social workers and they've gone through that process, they then have the separate conversation about property disregards. Is there any difference in terms of how it works in your geographies?
Well, yes, it works something like that. I mean, as I said in the case where we spoke about someone this morning, they don't know anything about property disregards. They came to us saying we have X amount of money, we want to move in, and so we have to now go back to them and explain this all to them. So this is what a property disregard is. You have to approach the local authority and ask them to agree to take on that risk and take on a property disregard, and that process can take a long time. So this person needs to move in now. They want to move into our home now. We can't take them because they can't commit to paying for the care, and we are now at the sort of behest of the local authorities to decide whether they agree to accept that and fund the care. On top of that, we are seeing a new phenomenon in some of our local authorities, which is a private brokering. So people who even do have the money to pay for care are being invited to go to the local authorities and pay for them to negotiate a rate. And we say, hold on a second, no, you can't pay £800 when our rate is £1,600 because we cannot sustain this business. And this is a local authority calling us up and saying, will you accept this rate? And I, responded, well, do they have the finances available? Yes, they do, but they've asked us to broker for them.
That was one of the Dilnot proposals back in 2020, 2021 of how we were potentially going to move away from this. That there was going to be this brokerage function for privately funded individuals launched by the local authorities. But I think it was Lang Buisson and a local authority group turned around and said, well, actually, if you did this, you're probably going to reduce total revenue by 25% across the sector because of the funding disparity. But that's just top-line revenue that comes out. So that's profitability, and most care homes trade at a 5% cash margin. This just simply does not work.
Well, our business wouldn't exist anymore. As a higher-end care home where we have higher staffing models and a higher level of care, it wouldn't exist. And that is this disparity in the care home complexity of the social care sector. Is you have the care homes funded by local authorities who have no choice but to accept a much lower rate, and their care provided is equivalent to that. And they've still got to satisfy their private investors to make their margins and their money. And so when the government and local authority looks at that, they say that is the cost of care. However, we turn around and say, no, that's not the cost of care, because our care, we have higher staffing ratio, we have higher quality of activities and food, etc., and it costs us twice as much, and so we are charging that amount. But if it was up to the local authorities to broker, they'd say, no, it doesn't. Care costs much less.
We one of the earlier podcasts with John Allen spoke very eloquently about this tension between the almost affordable housing and affordable care, and this luxury position that I think most providers are trying to get to, or this care hotel concept that some providers certainly aim for, and that we need to have this model of care that allows both affordable care provision, read affordable housing and social housing, but also we have to have this top end provision. I think that the local authorities are so cash strapped at the moment that they can't see beyond social housing. They can't see before this low cost model.
Exactly, as you say, because they are so short of funding, they can never accept that care costs the amount it costs in our care home model. And they also are not able to accept that people have different care needs. This is such a basic concept in social care that each of our residents have different needs. One might have dementia, one might be post-surgery, and a dementia or an Alzheimer's can present in so many different ways. And so their needs, we assess them when they move into their homes, can be vastly different, and that costs us very different amounts to look after, and we're very open up front about that. But when you go to a local authority, so how will you manage that? Will you pay us more for a resident who has much higher care needs? The answer is no. We don't accept people have different care needs because they can't accept, because they are so strapped for cash. Every single person moving into a home, it must cost the same to look after them, which is not personalised, it's not person-centred care, it's just not correct.
Mm. I just wanted to pick up on your point about the local authority and saying, oh yeah, you have to fund care for 3 years. Is that... So, just to explain, local authorities have a legal obligation to fund care if your assets drop below £23,500 in England, different in some of the devolved nations. What is this particular local authority now saying, we don't care about the asset threshold, it's 3 years, and that's what you've got to be able to fund? Or are they just setting an expectation there?
Hard to know what's going on inside the local authority, but I think they're trying to suggest to people they're on their own for a longer period than they should. A bit like they also try to suggest to people that when we say we can't afford to look after them anymore and the local authority refuses to pay, the local authority tells them you need to move to another home, to another provision, where actually under the rules currently set out in social care, local authorities have a responsibility wherever possible to keep people in the same place, to maintain their stability, their sort of life within the home. And again, it all comes back to them being so short of cash. And we often find that when we have these discussions with the family, and we tell the family, you've got to go to the local authority and tell them you have a responsibility to keep my mother or father in the home they're living now. Often the local authority will relent and find the money and keep them in that home. When we say that, we just don't get listened to at all.
I'm going to plug it here. There is a Annex A to the guidance for the Care Act. There's an awful lot of very, very useful things in it around this topic. So if anyone's listening, please go and find it, or someone send me an email, because it's a wonderful PDF, definitely worth reading. I wanted to pick up on your point on London staffing as well. So not only do we have this sort of existential crisis of housing and property values and people being probably quite asset rich but cash poor in London, you've got this fascinating concept, which I hadn't really thought about the London community being actually quite lonely. Now you mentioned it, I can understand that. So you've probably got people with quite complex levels of mental health, crises, anxiety, depression, loneliness, stress, and so on. But then at the same time, your point about staffing, well, of course, we need, you are going to need local workers, but how do you find them in inside the M25, and how does that work for you? What's your recruitment journey like?
Extremely challenging. And yes, the complexity of our residents is way higher than it ever used to be. And so our staffing needs are much higher than it used to be. And technology won't solve that. We need carers. We need people to really look after physically and help people. And that staffing journey, recruitment is really difficult. It's a very long process. Even finding candidates can be a massive struggle, take months. Then trying to sort of sift through the limited candidates. And it all comes down to which of those carers could afford to live in or near London is really the biggest challenge we have.
Are you finding that the change in immigration rules has actually hit you particularly hard, or was that something that wasn't
It will
really
do. It will do. It hasn't yet. So what the government have said is they basically don't want any carers coming from abroad, which I think is a great ideal. British residents will want, carers from inside the country. It's good for the economy, but it's a really tough, difficult job, and there are very few British carers, and they're not trained to do the job. So the government suddenly just saying you cannot have carers from abroad is starting to, and will moving forward, hit us very hard. And I'm not sure how we are going to manage it. And even the carers currently on those workplace visas, we're having trouble getting those renewed. And that can take a long time. And during that time, the staff don't know whether they're staying or going. And what is the solution to training up that workforce of British carers? Again, a great ideal, but how can you even convince them it's a good job to take on when they can earn as much sort of stacking shelves in the supermarket? So where are they going to come from? We're hoping the government change tack and allow us to recruit from abroad, because those are often some of our best carers. But we don't know right now what's going to happen.
What do you think makes your overseas workers some of your best carers? It's an interesting sentiment, and I just want to pick into it a bit.
It's a good question. I think often there's sort of a cultural difference to care. In some of the countries, nations we hire from, they have a really sort of integral caring culture, and it's sort of a profession. And hence a lot of the amazing Filipino care workers and Southeast Asian care workers are really amazing. I think it comes from that culture. that maybe we had in this country a few hundred years ago of, looking after people at home and caring for them in a different way in which you might not have needed care homes. Since we've sort of had that central space to look after people, I think the culture of caring has sort of declined away in this country, and we don't sort of have that anymore. It certainly doesn't mean someone from Britain or anywhere else in the world can't be caring, but some of these cultures just seem to have that sort of ingrained notion of caring, and it's sort of a vocation for them.
One of the things that I think is very, very true is that when you work in care and you see what a great carer can do, I think you recognise how difficult and challenging being a great carer is. I think anyone can care. I think but it's being a great carer is definitely a skill set. You're talking there about a culture change, I think, in this country. If we want to somehow create this internal workforce who will go in and be those great carers. Closed question first. Do you think that's possible?
I think it would probably take 40 or 50 years. So do we have a government that can commit to something long term? And well, we have no solution for social care in general, so I think the answer is not. But yeah, you're right. We would have to create that culture. We would have to start remembering that these residents exist. People just get old and disappear into a care home, and it goes out of the sort of national interest. I mean, we were talking yesterday at this summit, Care England, during the local elections. Who hears about social care talked about in the local elections? Who heard about social care mentioned in the general election? The government before the election were talking about a national care service, and then not a word during the election. No one asked them to explain their plan, how they're going to solve the crisis. Until we start talking about it, we can't change that culture. And then once we're aware that, these residents exist and we make the importance of social care up there on the agenda, then you can start changing the culture to say, well, it is a really difficult job, but it's very rewarding. You're looking after people, and I can get enjoyment every day going out of the office and going to talk with residents and hearing their stories and having a conversation. It can be, one of the most rewarding, or the most rewarding part of my job is just going up and having a chat with a different resident every day, hearing about their lives and their stories and sharing a part of that is really amazing.
I think it's a difficult sector to promote effectively as hey, come and have a career here, because ultimately care is a sector where you have to subsume your own ego and promote another. You're within social care. What's the benefits? You get to work with vulnerable individuals. You get to support them to live their life most effectively. It means that other people are not drawn into their care and having to support them, so you're freeing them up to go and work in the wider economy. It's not a sector where you get to contribute directly. You're not out there making or creating, you're supporting and enabling. And I don't think that's an easy sell.
No, I think that's really nicely put. I think it is a really selfless job. Sometimes you have, carers saying, well, chatting to the residents, but we don't have anything in common to talk about. And that's really difficult, and it's totally true. As a carer, you have to talk about what the resident wants to talk about. You have to hear about their life. And for me, that's quite fulfilling. But some people will think, well, how does that benefit me? And so, yes, I think what you sort of said about ego and that selflessness is really true. That's not an easy thing to do, to spend all day focused on someone else, to talk about someone else. And I think the other side, which you sort of intertwined there, is what is amazing about care is it then frees up those people who were volunteering, were caring for them. Every household, it's the children, often the daughters, who become those full-time carers without asking to do it, and their lives become consumed looking after and loving their sort of parent or whoever it is. And suddenly, once people are in care, they get freed up to live their lives again. And I think that is really important. But we need to be careful about not seeing residents and older people as a burden. It needs to be built into our culture and our sort of psyche that is not a burden. It's something, there's an amazing knowledge and wisdom in these residents and things to learn from them. And all we do is we see them as a sort of problem. And I think, again, that is that cultural difference between some of those Filipino or Indian carers is, they don't see caring as a burden. They see it as an opportunity, an amazing, fulfilling thing. And that's what we've got to change.
So let's get our magic wands out and wave them, because locking individuals into their own homes isn't part of the solution, because that doesn't support. And actually, probably keeping people in institutional care homes isn't part of the solution here, because again, there's a closed door there. It's very difficult to see inside a care home. So let's wave a magic wand. How do we get to the culture that we're talking about here? What do you think needs to change to older person social care to allow us to migrate to this place?
Integration. And I think I was talking to someone about this yesterday, about setting up a project they're doing, setting up education to teach young people about social care. Because most of us only bump into social care when we suddenly need it because our parents are sick or somebody's sick and you need it. You don't know anything about it before that. It's not a general part of society. So it's integrating it into the education system so that people understand what it is, why it's important from a very young age, want to be part of that. Right now, they don't even know about it. So who wants to become a carer or go into care when they're not aware of what's going on, how it works, how many people it helps, and supports? It's supporting a whole sector in industry. So I think that's certainly part of it is integrating it into the education system. And that sort of wider integration as well is we operate sort of independently of what's going on in the NHS or other services. And again, I was speaking to some NHS doctors who said, oh, well, you're running a care home, that's amazing, you must always be full, it must be so brilliant, you've got no problems, it's so hard working in the NHS. I said, no, we're not always full, and if only we could have residents who are blocking your NHS beds, that would be brilliant. Again, it could be very simple, but there's no joined up thinking there. And it's clear that people don't even understand how there's some entrenched thinking. Somehow everyone in the NHS thinks all care homes are full and we can't send people there, and the care think, oh, the NHS aren't properly releasing people from beds, but there's a disconnect somehow.
What do you think that disconnect is?
Well, I think that there is just no. I think the NHS and local authorities don't want to understand what it's like in care. They don't necessarily want to understand our challenges. They have their own set of challenges, and they quite like to see things probably carrying on as they are. And we just don't have those relationships especially between like the private social care sector and the NHS. And those would have to be built up.
Mm. So what's happening because we don't have those relationships? Explain to me what it's like being in a major urban environment like London with an NHS that doesn't understand social care.
Well, you've got a load of people going into hospital who should be looked after in a care home setting. We have the resources and know how to do that. The hospital don't. They know how to do the acute side and to sort of get people better in the first instance. They need to move into care. That doesn't seem to happen. And so for the people using the service, they don't get the support they need. They are left often languishing in a hospital bed without sort of physio, and so they get much, much sicker and more unwell. They don't get the recovery and the support they need. And ironically, we can provide it. It actually costs us less to provide it than the NHS. and it's just not happening.
Again, this is possibly a generalisation of London, and I'm fascinated by this as a concept. So tell me to shut up eventually. The one thing you notice about London is that everyone is always walking past each other, and no one really stops to acknowledge. You don't have that. You know, it's so easy to see. How does a Londoner say hello to someone that they've known for 15 years really well and see every weekend with the nod of the head, and that's it. I'm wondering if that actually informs how we do care in a major urban environments, that we don't acknowledge the individual as much as we might do in somewhere that it's a bit more, there is more community. Is that fair?
Well, is it fair? I think somewhat. It is true of the sort of big city where you've got 9 million people living there. If that number is still correct, I'm not sure. That people are effectively just a number, and it's less of a community than I'm sure a smaller place would be. I think we strive where we can in the homes to do everything we can to make the care person centred, and for people to feel like they have their own identity and character and part of a community. But it's certainly much harder to build that within the home, especially since COVID, where we were there was this invisible boundary. We were cut off from the local authority, from the local community, through the sort of lockdowns and isolation periods. And we lost a massive number of relationships with community groups, some of which disappeared anyway because they couldn't afford to survive during COVID. And it means that residents are more and more isolated in the care home. And even to this day, we're still finding that burden from COVID. When everyone sort of moved on, those relationships, we're struggling to rebuild them. We used to have an intergenerational music festival where school children would come in and perform for the residents. It was a competition. It was an amazing thing. That was cut off by COVID. We were doing a sort of big draw artistic program every year in all our homes, and again that had to be stopped for COVID. And that yes, it sort of caused a lot of isolation, and to try and maintain community relations feels harder in a big city. Everyone's going on with their lives. Even we recently reconnected with North London Hospice, which is 200 metres away from our home, and I just thought, how come we weren't connected? It feels so close yet also so far.
Mm-hmm. And you've then got the connection between the NHS and the local authority with this big city mindset, lack of connection, I don't want to say lack of empathy, because clearly they do, but
it presents as a lack of empathy when you're so strapped for cash as the local authorities are, when they've got to decide between, is it today putting someone in a care home or putting someone through education. That presents itself through a lack of empathy. They have to focus on the numbers and the figures only and calculate on that basis, and it does present in that way that they're not being empathetic. And I don't think it's their intention. Again, they've got hundreds of people to place who don't have placements. So when I come to them and say, you need to pay this amount of money so we can look after them properly, they'll say, but I've got 10 of them and we can't afford that. So you understand how it is, but it is those big city, those pressures, that stretched resources stretched so thin that unless there's a big injection of cash that is specifically for placing people in social care, I don't see what could resolve the situation.
What does that mean for the individuals who are coming to you requiring care? You mentioned before that the emotional position that people are in when they're coming in and seeking care. It's an urgent need. It's typically something that's not planned, and I think many providers will empathise with that. What are the majority of people who you're meeting? They're either looking for a care home or they're just going through that initial placement period. What are their emotions like? How are they feeling?
It's a really, really stressful period. And again, culturally, no one thinks about care until it's needed. So they haven't put the planning in place. It's not something you have a lot of time to consider, and suddenly they need care, and they're running around looking at homes, and often then coming and asking for my advice and our advice as a sort of team. And I will often say, don't make a decision yet. Go see some other places. This is such a big decision. You need to be making an informed decision, and you don't have much time. What are you looking for? Are you looking for the amazing, vistas and fixtures and fittings? Are you looking for a really high level of care? Are you looking for something that supports your particular culture or religion or something like that? And it just results in sort of people rushing around like headless chickens trying to find the right place without properly considering all the different issues and challenges with moving into a care home. But then even if they have made their decision, they then have the challenge of those dealings with the local authorities over a property disregard or over funding. So it's for people who've never been in social care before, it is such a challenging thing to deal with. And every provider will tell you something different. Every local authority will give you a different message and give you different instructions. So there is no one coordinated guide for people coming into care to say this is how it works. It's quite simple. You need care. We're here to provide. No, it's not like that. It is complex. It is challenging, and I really feel for people who are going through that journey. And we do our best to try and make it easier wherever possible.
The geography of London, and it is. I'm not sure if it's as transient as I think it is. Are you finding that most people who are being placed with you or coming to look around, that it's because the children are local, or are people trying to keep their loved ones and their parents and their relatives within their own local community so that they can still see their friendship groups? Are people moving much within London?
It's a really important point, if someone comes to me and say, why should we choose your home? On what basis are we choosing a home? I say number one is the level of care provided. Number two is probably the location. And I would say the priority is nearer where the children live, because having visits, being able to interact and socialise, again, is what makes care homes special and what they are, and that's really important. If it can be both, near where the resident lives and relative lives, then that's great. But that makes it a really hard challenge. Often we have people coming from Scotland, or where the relatives have moved very far away, or the residents moved, and so it becomes you have to uproot everything and move into this home, and sometimes the relatives have to uproot everything so they can come visit. We have someone who comes in from Chile regularly to come visit, and that's incredible. It's amazing, but not everyone can afford to or can have the sort of situation where they can do that.
I think the definition of close, though, in London is, you said, okay, in our rural environment, I live 20 minutes, 30 minutes down the road. It's pretty close for some of our care homes. I don't know how far 20 minutes down the road is in London. I don't drive there for a deliberate reason.
20 minutes down the road is half a mile, yeah.
Exactly, but I suppose your sense of geography and your mental map of what is close is going to be different. Do you find any people making weird decisions about that? Sort of that, I don't know, this street is close, but the street opposite is too far away.
Yeah, I mean, living in London is, you're on a day with bad traffic, you can't move 5 meters. So, you might need to be near a bus stop or a train station, and depending on where you live, is that the overground station or the tube station, or is it the Thames Link, the National Rail? So yeah, it is actually a sort of mental gymnastics to try and work out what's a good location. If you really want to be visiting your parents every day or every other day, and you're going potentially off to work in central London each day, so you're making a massive commute, and fitting all that in together is really difficult and is a really sort of challenge in people's lives. So yeah, it's potentially, road by road can make a big difference. where you are rurally, there's a load of people dotted around. There's a central care home, and it is what it is, isn't it? And apart from the occasional tractor, you probably don't have a huge amount of traffic to deal with.
Yeah. There are a lot of tractors in Herefordshire. Far too many when I have to drive over there. Um, you mentioned earlier that IT isn't the solution. I think you're faced with financial pressures, lack of staffing, increased complexity. I think many people would be interested to hear that no, AI and IT isn't the solution. Um, why do you say that?
We are bombarded by technology, left, right, and centre every single day, and told that it's going to be the solution to everything. And if I listened to all those people, we'd have 30 different systems. I wouldn't know what they all did. I wouldn't be able to pay attention to them. And guess who loses out? It's the residents, because I wouldn't be able to focus on the residents. The care staff definitely wouldn't be. The managers wouldn't be able to focus on the residents. And technological advancement in general is a great thing. Moving over to the digital care planning system has improved residents' care. But the burden it has now brought is just too much on the care sector. You have carers who are on their mobile devices writing notes about the residents, sitting next to them and not interacting with them. And they have to do that all day. Someone will come to us and say, you need a quality compliance system. And okay, that would be good. But again, that takes us away from looking after the residents. But it ticks the box to say, how many safeguards have you had? How many falls have you had? Are you on top of that? So technology in itself isn't the problem. It's the way that technology companies have come into the sector thinking they can make some money off it and pushing all these systems onto us and saying we need them. And we're seeing another generation of that in the last year suddenly with AI. Our system has AI, take it on. We're going to make the system with AI. Well, what's AI going to do for us? And how is it going to help our residents? And I'm yet to hear an answer to that question. But I've been pushed 10 different systems in the last week already because it's got AI. It's going to be brilliant for the care sector. And I think for any business, it's our residents, our service users who we're focusing on. We need systems to be developed with their interests in mind. How can we allow the staff to spend time with our residents? Because that's what matters. And there is a space for AI to be used there, and there is a space for technology to be used there. If they didn't have to spend their time writing word for word every care plan, if the AI could assist to do that with them, they could have the interaction with residents, spend less time writing it up, and that would be wonderful. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing more systems, more time spent writing plans and risk assessments and governance, and less time spent with residents, and that's only increasing as the regulation increases. So where will that lead? AI will tell you what you want to hear. Yes, the residents are being looked after wonderfully because you have the AI system, everything's wonderful, but are they? Are they just lying in bed, not being cared for?
I think when you're in a very task-focused environment, it's very difficult to find time to hold someone's hand and to take the time to have the very human interactions that we were saying earlier actually now need to be part of this new culture of our country to allow us to care more.
Because the people who are creating the systems and the regulations aren't thinking of what the needs of the residents are. They're thinking of what your risks are or what we need as a business. Well, what they really should be saying is, what do we need to do to improve the lives of our residents, which makes the community and society better. And so it's going right back to that core first principles of what do we need to do for our residents, and then build a system around that. But we're not seeing that, unfortunately.
I've got a note here that it was something that you mentioned yesterday when we caught up at Care England's event. The system doesn't work; it falls down between us. And we were talking about the various different bodies, the local authorities, the NHS, providers, what have you. Just we I think it's really easy in social care to bash other people. It's not Oscar. And I think what a lot of what you've said is actually the local authorities are trying to do their best. The NHS are trying to do their best. Providers are trying to do their best, but it just doesn't work, the system falls over. You just mentioned there that we need to change how we look at things and then build the system around it. And Baroness Casey has spoken about this being a moment of possibly quite radical reform for social care. Do you think this is a tear it all down and start from a blank piece of paper moment? Or do you think that the sector can actually be, be changed to create something that works?
Very much the latter, I think. I think everyone in their own areas is working really hard. The majority of people really care about person centered, empathetic care. We're just not working together. The system isn't set up. It's grown organically over many, many years with an ever increasing aging population, and we're not working together. And a lot of the things I hear yesterday or after that article in the Sunday Times was, we could have said exactly the same as you. People in the care sector saying our challenges are identical. We're saying the same things, we're seeing the same things, but nothing is working, nothing is getting fixed. So I don't think we need to tear it all down. I think, for example, in our business, we could go back to supporting local authority residents who can't afford to have care and provide the same great level of care to private residents if the local authority had the funding to pay for it. What I was talking to yesterday was, when we say no to those residents from local authority, who it's often because the needs are very complex. What happens to them? Where do they go? We're letting people down because we can't afford to look after them. And, the NHS is doing their very best, but people are languishing in those beds because they can't unblock them and not getting the care they need. Again, a relationship being built with the social care sector, where right now I would say, yes, please, we would love to look after people in our care home. Can we have some people who are currently in your beds in the NHS? That doesn't seem to happen. There is no connection. So the framework needs to be rebuilt. The providers there and the different parts of the system doing their jobs are doing it well, So no, I don't think it's tear it all down, but I think it needs a major adaptation. I think someone needs to look at it from the very top, all the different systems of healthcare we have in the country and how can they work together. And there's a space for all of them, for private providers, for local authority providers, for the very high-end care and the lower end, and that's just us in residential care. That's my focus, but there's the sort of other complex care and learning difficulties and younger persons and mental health all mixed into that as well.
Mm. Do you think, you mentioned earlier about COVID and how maybe we've not moved on? Do you think that's still holding us back? That we do need to shed these old legacies that we've built up in our way of operation?
Yeah, I think what I meant with that is that the world moved on. Things have to, COVID ended and everyone just got back to their day. Social care didn't seem to, it sort of got stuck. And yes, we are constantly trying to find a way to end that. One of the aspects of that was just, the general public's confidence in care homes was shattered. The people were sent into care homes with COVID and there was no PPE, there was no process, there was no provision to deal with it. And it ended up in residents dying and being isolated in the care homes and lockdowns in the care homes. And that is no fun. It's definitely no better than being at home. In fact, it's worse. So the whole point of being in a care home is that interaction of socialization with others, being part of a community. And that wasn't allowed during COVID. So...
And I think that makes a really interesting challenge for us as a sector to say, okay, we need to have a top-down vision change. Someone needs to get on top of that. At the same time, I love the concept of bringing an understanding of what social care is in through the education system, even though, once again, whose responsibility is it to fix things? It's teachers. It's always the teacher's responsibility to fix things. And then at the same time, it's how do we get this mindset shift away from care homes bad because COVID, because lockdown, and all this recent
Institutional.
institutional, yeah, that's quite a big change that we need to achieve for a sector that is as fragmented as ours.
I was quite inspired yesterday, I think, at that Caringness Summit. And, I've started to do more and more networking. And everyone says the word challenge and complexity I heard 100 times yesterday. And it's totally true. But the thing that quite inspired me is there are people there, amazing people, who are ready to make a difference and already are. It's just a question of will they be listened to by the people in power? That's the question. I'm speaking to people who are setting up, education sort of proposals, and they're doing this stuff right now. They're trying to fix it, but one person trying to fix it isn't enough. They need to be listened to, and that needs to be rolled out across the sector and the community and the culture and society. So I felt that was, even though we're massively challenged, I did feel that was quite inspiring.
Yeah, it is. We're speaking on Friday, the 8th of May, which is some of the local election results are coming out. From what I've seen, it looks like Reform are taking a bit of a lead in the polls, and Labour and the Conservatives seem to be losing councillor seats. Do you think that this changes with the changing political landscape of this country? Or do you think, so are we talking about the people who are listening? Is this change in political landscape going to affect that change? Is it going to drive it? Or do you actually think this might need to be a population movement where actually it's the people who aren't involved in politics, it's the people who are coming into social care or learning about it, actually they're the ones who are going to be driving the change? Which is the chicken or which is the egg, do you think?
I think it's bigger than individual parties and politics. I think yesterday it was said that Tony Blair was the first person to say that we need to look at social care and have a report and that there's been many reports since many years since then, and nothing's happened at all. I think the local elections talk, that people want to see something different. I think that's the main message coming from it. The two old parties haven't managed to. The current government was elected on the basis of change, and they haven't managed to change. They didn't even bother getting into the detail of social care, mainly because these things are so complex. Even if they really wanted to make change, it can't happen overnight. And our political system is focused on those short-term gains, and politicians react to that instead of long-term solutions. This needs to be society-wide change. And to be fair, it is something that the government sort of talked about when they commissioned the latest review and report. It's got to be cross-party, and that's why it needs to take so long. You could say that's just kicking the issues down the road, and those things should happen immediately, because many people within the care sector have suggested some very practical, simple solutions to fix the issues right now, and those are being ignored. But the principle that this needs to be society-wide change is, I think, very correct. It can't be an individual party represented by some part of the population. It's got to be everyone who's got to get together and say, right, we need to fix social care. How can we do that?
Talk about what you just said there. We're in a position where political change is possibly coming, where but it's the communities that are going to be driving this change. And yet, in London, I think you have many more different communities. I think it's always been this melting pot. And you spoke earlier about the need for people to not only think about geography, but also what religious groups they want to be around. Where is their local community within London, and that's an important reason to choose which care home you go to. Do you think that these more integrated, or perhaps even having not lived in London, they might even be more fragmented communities? Do you think that they're going to allow or facilitate these change, or do you think that actually work needs to be done to bring more local communities together before we can have the community action that you just spoke about?
That's a great question. I think, considering what we've said, I think we need to first build the community cohesion and the common focus and vision of what we want to build as a society. And I don't think that's just reflected in social care. I think it's also a question of how we fix the NHS and our public services and other issues. Is what does our new diverse British community, what do they want and need, and then work out how do we fix it. Again, that points to a much longer road with a much longer term strategic thinking and planning than just fix social care, fix the issues.
So one of the themes that is starting to emerge from this podcast is very much that it's not, you can't just throw money at the problem, because that's just going to keep the problem going. It's just in a slightly different format. What we're seeing now is that actually it's about community. It's about the social bit of social care, that it is about this societal change. And I think you and I are both sort of second generation owners of care businesses. Third, sorry. Do you think that our generation is going to achieve this? Or do you think that actually we're now looking at our kids and going, no, you're the ones who've got to fix this?
Well, complex question. Number one, I don't agree with you. And I don't agree with some of the politicians who say you can't just throw money at it. I think we need to throw some money at it in the short term to get people properly cared for and looked after. It's not the solution to fixing it in the longer term, but I think it's a start. But yes, coming to your point, I don't think it's going to be us. I think it's going to be our children. But they are going to be the ones who will struggle even more to look after us because of house prices and house ownership. They won't have the property necessarily to release to look after our care. So a bit like sort of, I think the younger generation feel about the environment and climate change, we've been left with a problem that we've got to solve and no help from previous generations who've created the problem. I think social care is the same thing. It's going to take so long to solve. It's going to become their burden and their problem to resolve. And it may even be their children.
And on that cheery note, Theodore, we've covered a load of ground, and yeah, social care is challenging no matter what geography you're working in. Give me a positive. What's a great thing about running care homes in London?
I would say, just as I said earlier, something that brightens my day and keeps me motivated to run a care home is the lives and the stories of the residents, and how you can bring them to life, really. You know, a lot of it is the men, and we have much fewer men in our care homes, but they will often be in the corner staring out the window or doing a crossword puzzle, not interacting. And we have some amazing stories. You know, especially recently, we have an amazing artist in residence in the care homes who, you know, found one of our residents and encouraged them to start doing arts and crafts. And he picked up this amazing mosaic project, and he was doing these amazing mosaics that he didn't know where the inspiration came from. And he's moved on to all sorts of other things, and he's like the talk of the home, the talk of the town. And he's gone from someone sort of sitting in the corner staring out the window to someone who's a central sort of core of our care home community, and is like has a new life. And for me, I feel that's incredibly heartwarming. The more stories like that every day, that's what keeps me going. And that's something I think we should all look forward to, what social care can be, what it can really be about.
The giving of purpose is critical, and that moment of when you see it, you know it, and it is an amazing thing.
Yeah, also just enjoying your life. Like, they should be here, we're looking after them, they should be having fun, they should be enjoying themselves. And if we can make people realise that care home is not just the end of someone's life and a burden and a sort of solution to a problem, that actually we can give someone a new life, give them, let them have fun and enjoy themselves, then that will be so much better.
That's a wonderful statement for us all to live by, and I think a really great place to end this. Theodore, thank you so much for your time. Genuinely appreciated. If people wanted to get hold of you and find out more, because obviously you were involved in that Sunday Times article, which impacted quite a few of us in social care. But if they wanted to find you, where would they get you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Is always a good place. Look up Springdene Care Homes, Theodore Powell. They can get me by email at tpowell@springdene.co.uk. Yeah, it's been a real
Brilliant.
pleasure. Thank you very much, Michael. It's been really enjoyable.
No, thank you so much for being here, Theodore. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks.